Okay, let's have a look at this material here. So we'll start with the detection of ether, and we'll move on to a few things I found on Google recently, which was the Feely Keating interferometer. Oh yes, which also talks about the Sagnac, or the Sagnac as some call it. So I will go on to this very shortly after I finish this book here, or some of it, The Detection of Ether. Introduction. Since the days of Sir Isaac Newton, there have been two basic theories that have attempted to answer the question, what is light? Is light a particle, or is there some substance that fills the universe? And light is a wave or signal that travels through the substance, which like sound is a wave or signal that travels through the air. The problem in answering this question is that light has both very strong particle properties and light has very strong wave properties. The particle theory of light is now called the photon theory. This theory is that photon particles are created and destroyed by atoms when electrons change quantum levels. This is a simplistic view, but it is sufficient for now. The particle theory of light was the dominant theory of light on two occasions. Newton believed light was a particle, then called a corpuscle. Correct me if I pronounced that correctly, or how I pronounced that, corpuscle. And his theory held until the very early 1800s. Einstein believed light was a particle, now called the photon. And his theory has been enforced since 1924 and continues to be the dominant theory at the current time. The wave theory of light is called the ether theory, or more commonly the ether theory. Different spelling there. One reason for having two spellings is to differentiate the ether that fills the universe versus the gas that can be used to put people to sleep. The ether theory is that the universe is filled with small particles, which I call ethons. Ether is considered a medium for light, meaning light is a signal or a wave that travels through the medium of ether. The theory of light was in favor with the scientific community from the very early 1800s to 1924. Some people believed in both ether and photons. For example, Einstein admitted that his general theory of relativity would not work without ether. But the ether of Einstein's general relativity is vastly different from the ether of Nikola Tesla and Albert Michelson, and will not be discussed in this book. Einstein's approach. A person might wonder what Einstein's special theory of relativity, SR, has to do with the photon versus ether issue. Actually, the SR, special relativity, was designed to be a key part of Einstein's three-pronged attack on ether in 1905. Ether, as believed in 1905, filled the universe and was stationary. That is, not moving. This meant that ether formed a universal reference frame, or URF. In other words, in 1905, our sun was considered totally at rest relative to the universe, and our sun was considered totally at rest relative to the ether. This meant that the ether itself was at rest relative to the universe and therefore considered a URF, or universal reference frame. Einstein's theory of relativity tried to replace the universal reference frame of ether with the concept of relative reference frames, RRF. The removal of the universal reference frame is exactly the same thing as removal of ether. In the introduction to the special relativity paper, Einstein made this statement: the introduction of a luminiferous ether will prove to be superfluous. Will prove to be superfluous in as much as the few here to be developed will not require an absolutely stationary space, provided with special properties, nor assign a velocity vector to a point of the empty space in which electromagnetic processes take place. This first prong in the attempt to eliminate the ether was called the first postulate of special relativity. Einstein's second attack on ether had to do with the speed of light. In the 1880s, Michelson and Morley had done an experiment to detect the ether by detecting variances in the speed of light caused by our Earth's motion through the stationary ether, which was considered the medium for light. The experiment received a null result, meaning they did not detect any variance in the speed of light. Einstein's second postulate in the special relativity was another attempt to dispense the ether. In this postulate, he speculated that the speed of light was a constant to all observers. He used this postulate to explain the null result of the Michelson-Morley interferometer experiment. By using the special relativity to explain the Michelson-Morley null result, there was no need for ether drag, quote, which will be discussed in a moment, to explain null result, thus opening the door to a particle nature of light. Because both of the postulates of the special relativity were designed to dispense the ether, it is clear that the main purpose of the special relativity was to dispense with ether. Thus, the special relativity and the photon theory are heavily intertwined. Einstein's third approach to dispense the ether in 1905 was to use the particle nature of light. In his paper on the photoelectric effect, he tried to use the particle nature of light to try to disprove the wave theory of light, meaning he again tried to dispense with ether. Einstein's three-pronged attack on ether in 1905 was supplemented by other experiments and other observations, such as the blackbody radiation formulas of Planck. Nevertheless, the particle theory of light, now called photon theory, was not accepted until 1924. Einstein's Nobel Prize in 1921 was not awarded for his particle theory of light, but for his special relativity, but rather it was Einstein's Nobel Prize in 1921 was not awarded for his particle theory of light or for his special relativity, but rather it was awarded for the formulas he developed for the photoelectric effect. While it is true that the particle theory of light is the dominant theory because of light's particle properties, it is also true that light has equally powerful wave properties. Thus, we cannot determine whether light is a particle or a wave by appealing to the particle or wave properties of light. Light has both properties. My approach. In 1997, I designed several experiments to use the path of light to detect. In 1997, I designed several experiments to use the path of light to detect the expansion of the Big Bang. After months of frustration, it suddenly occurred to me that ether drag, quote, which will be discussed in a moment, was literally interfering with my experiment. I did not detect the Big Bang, but I inadvertently detected ether drag. With this discovery in mind, I then set about to dissect the Healy-Keating experiment, which was a key experiment in the proof of relativity. In the Healy-Keating experiment, 4 cesium atomic clocks were flown around the world, first eastbound, then westbound. They predicted and observed that the clocks recorded different actual times compared to the actual time measured by a stationary atomic clock on the ground when they were headed eastbound versus when they were headed westbound. What I discovered in my analysis is that the at-rest reference frame chosen by Healy-Keating, a non-rotating point pi dipolar pole, creates a very different coordinate system, and that ether drag is the only possible substance force or field that has this same coordinate system and could have caused resistance to cesium atoms and thus could have caused the actual time changes to the atomic clocks. What is unique about ether drag is that it forms a bubble around the Earth. That is ether drag, and this bubble does not rotate with the Earth. That is, it is non-rotating, a property which no other substance force or field has. With this in mind, just like Einstein had a three-pronged attack against ether, this book will have a three-pronged attack against both special relativity and the photon theory. The first 5 chapters of this book, including this chapter, will deal with the Healy-Keating experiment and special relativity. For example, in the original special relativity 1905, any object that is any reference frame in an experiment could be used as an at-rest reference frame. By 1920, Einstein had personally changed this to say that none of the objects in an experiment could be used as an at-rest reference frame. He stated that only at-rest reference frame. He stated that only one at-rest reference frame could be used, and it was the center of a rotating disk. When Healy and Keating did their experiments, their one and only at-rest reference point was thousands of kilometers from any aspect of the experiments. I will show that long before the Healy-Keating experiment, the first postulate of relativity had already been abandoned. I should also mention at this point that there have been 2 different experiments that have detected a universal reference frame, one of which is the CMBF, or the CMBR, Cosmic Microwave Background Radiation Experiments. So this is a URF, universal reference frame. This book here claims the cosmic microwave background radiation is a universal reference frame. How about you? Do you agree with that? But perhaps equally as important as Einstein's own dismissal of relative reference frame, I think, is that an relative RRF does not require a cause. In other words, an RRF is an apparent reference frame, and as such does not require any causal factors such as a substance force or field. When the special relativity evolved from apparent time, that is the apparent time of an apparent reference frame, to the actual time changes that Healy and Keating measured with their atomic clocks, the scientific community failed to make the switch from an apparent time to an actual cause. Apparent cause to an actual cause. Right now in physics, the actual time changes in Healy-Keating's atomic clocks have an apparent cause, meaning an imaginary cause. Actual time changes require an actual cause. The only substance force or field that has the correct coordinate system and could be the actual cause of the Healy-Keating nature is ether drag. Furthermore, the special relativity deals with an at-rest reference frame that is thousands of kilometers from the experiment and could not have caused the actual time changes. Ether drag deals with a substance that comes into direct contact with the cesium atoms in the atomic clocks. My discussion of the HK Healy-Keating proves that the special relativity is really ether drag, and this is my first prong. Chapter 6 through 10 deals with my 2 experiments plus the experiments of lunar laser ranging. All 3 of these experiments involve the path of light. These 3 experiments result in several paradoxes that totally eliminate any possibility that light is a particle, meaning it is impossible that photons exist. This is my second prong. After a chapter on the particle nature of light and ether, there is a chapter on whether it is theoretically possible that the speed of light can be constant with the photon theory. The result of this chapter is a paradox that clearly demonstrates that Einstein's second postulate cannot possibly be valid. This is my third prong. In short, Einstein dealt with the particle nature of light, the speed of light, and relative reference frames, but dispense with the ether theory. I will deal mainly with the path of light and ether drag to prove that ether exists. Einstein dealt with non-causal postulates. I will deal with causal theories. Causal theories. Einstein dealt with non-causal postulates. I will deal with causal theories. I will not use the wave nature of light as one of my evidences. It is not necessary. When all of the dust settles, it will be very clear that ether and ether drag exist. This chapter will be the first chapter to deal with the Healy-Keating experiment. Blah blah blah. Testing. This chapter will be the first chapter to deal with the Healy-Keating experiment. Because the Healy-Keating experiment deals with special relativity, it is first necessary to have a short lecture on simple astronomy to understand what the current feeling on the universal reference frame is. I'll then have a short section of what ether drag is. After these 2 sections, I will start to discuss the Healy-Keating experiment in detail. After this chapter, the next 4 chapters will dive into this subject in even more detail. The universal reference frame, CMBR, or cosmic microwave background radiation. It is currently believed that our solar system is moving through space at about 307 kilometers per second. That's interesting. You say the matrix system. You must be British. Okay. The velocity of our solar system and thus our Earth is a net speed consisting of 2 major motions. The velocity of our solar system and thus our Earth is a net speed consisting of 2 major motions and several minor motions. These are the two major motions of our solar system. One, the velocity of our galaxy and cosmos, with which our solar system is carried along at 600 kilometers per second towards the Hydra Centaurus supercluster of the Great Attractor. The velocity of our solar system in orbit around the center of our galaxy towards the Deneb in the Cygnus constellation at 230 kilometers per second. That is the rotation velocity of our galaxy at our distance from the galactic Barry center, meaning gravitational center of mass. The net of all the motions of our solar system is a 370 km per second velocity towards the constellation Leo, or slightly below it, and away from the constellation Aquarius. This net velocity was calculated based on variances in the 2.7 degree Kelvin blackbody radiation per the COBE satellite. I don't know what it is. U-2 spy planes, high altitude balloons, and even newer equipment. This blackbody radiation is called the blackbody radiation. The net velocity was calculated based on variances in the 2.7 degree Kelvin. Blackbody radiation per the COBE satellite, U-2 spy planes, high altitude balloons, and even newer equipment. This blackbody radiation is called cosmic microwave background radiation, CMBR. To the best of my knowledge, the CMBR was first discovered in 1978. To the best of my knowledge, the CMBR was first discovered in 1978. The CMBR creates a universal reference frame, URF, or absolute reference frame. I say absolute reference frame, ARF, for the universe as we know it. It also creates an absolute time frame, ATF, for the universe. Consider this quote: the data indicate that the Earth's velocity is about 400 kilometers per second in the approximate direction of constellation Leo, even though the principle of reality says that there is no preferred frame of reference, as the laws of physics look the same to all observers. There is nevertheless a way to determine our absolute velocity with respect to our universe. There is nevertheless a way to determine our absolute velocity with respect to the universe, which all physics claim is not possible. Here, this claim is possible due to the ARF, the absolute reference frame, the cosmic microwave background radiation, thus the URF universal reference frame. The two major motions of our solar system are very linear over the period of a few thousand years, hence our solar system is traveling in an extremely linear direction and an extremely constant speed. Imagine walking on the perimeter of a circle that has a radius of 25,000 light years, our sun's distance from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. The total motion of our planet is a little more complicated because we are orbiting the sun at an average velocity of 30 kilometers per second, and because we are carried with the solar system, our Earth's average velocity in the universe is still 370 kilometers per second, but it ranges from 340 kilometers per second to 400 kilometers per second. Note that constellation Leo is on our ecliptic plane, the 2D plane formed by our sun and our Earth's orbit. Prior to the late 1920s, when it was discovered that our universe was expanding, it was generally believed that our sun was stationary in the universe and that our Earth's total motion in space was only 30 kilometers per second. Due solely to our orbit around the 1920s. In the 1920s, prior to the late 1920s, when it was discovered that our universe was expanding, it was generally believed that our sun was stationary. In the 1920s in the universe, and that our Earth's total motion, our sun was stationary in the 1920s, and our sun total motion in space was only 30 kilometers per second, due solely to our orbit around the stationary sun. This figure was consistent with stellar aberration or annual aberration, which is a small tilt of telescopes required by astronomers because of our Earth's orbital velocity around the sun. For many decades prior to the 1920s, it has been known that aberration of starlight, that is the amount of the required tilt, was a good way to estimate our orbital velocity around the sun. However, with our new knowledge of our total velocity in the universe, that is 370 kilometers per second to 30 kilometers per second, the new explanation of aberration of starlight wasn't needed. Astronomers now have a term for the aberration caused by our solar system's total motion in space. They call it secular aberration. The U.S. Naval Observatory Multi-Year Interactive Computer Almanac state. The U.S. Naval Observatory Multi-Year Interactive Computer Almanac states in its glossary, aberration secular. Component of stellar aberration resulting from the essentially uniform rectilinear motion of the entire solar system in space. Secular aberration is usually disregarded. The reason secular aberration is usually disregarded is not because it doesn't exist, it does exist, but because it is so constant that it is virtually impossible to detect. It causes a shift in the entire celestial sphere, meaning the actual position of virtually every star is not where it appears to be because of secular aberration. But since we aren't traveling to these stars anytime soon, no one seems to care. Since secular aberration is so uniform over a period of a few thousand years, it is now believed that the actual tilt of aberration, that is the velocity which determines the degree that telescopes need to be tilted, is based on our 370 kilometers per second total velocity, but that the observable tilt of aberration is based on the differential velocity of the Earth towards the constellation Leo. The differential velocity of the Earth is caused exclusively by our orbit around the Sun. I am ignoring several minor issues not significant to this discussion. Alright, let's begin with ether drag. In the 1980s, it was felt that our Sun was stationary in the universe, thus the only motion of our Earth in the universe, thus the only motion of our Earth in the universe, as they thought at the time, was our Earth's orbital velocity around the Sun at an average speed of 30 kilometers per second. Okay, so this was in the 1980s. Okay. In the 1980s, it was felt that our Sun was stationary in the universe. Thus, the only motion of our Earth in the universe, as they thought at the time, was our Earth's orbital velocity around the Sun at an average of 30 kilometers per second. In the 1880s, the ether was believed to exist throughout the universe. The particle theory of light was not accepted by the scientific community until 1924. And it was also felt that the ether was stationary in the universe. Since our Earth was moving through the stationary ether at 30 kilometers per second, there should have been a 30 kilometers per second ether wind on the surface of the Earth. ether wind at 30 kilometers per second on the surface of the Earth. Due to the Earth moving through stationary ether at 30 kilometers per second. In other words, imagine an automobile traveling at 100 kilometers per hour down a highway when the air is motionless. The car's surface will experience a 100 kilometer per hour wind, even though the air is motionless. Similarly, if the Earth were moving at 30 kilometers per second stationary ether, through the stationary ether, there would be a 30 kilometer per second ether wind on the surface of the Earth. An experiment was designed by Michelson and Morley to detect the 30 kilometer per second ether wind by detecting variances of the speed of light. Note, whether the Earth was stationary and ether was moving, or whether the Earth was moving and ether was stationary, does not matter. The relative motion of the Earth and ether would cause a change in the speed of light if measured on the Earth, but they could not detect this ether wind. The null result of the Michelson-Morley interferometer, Michelson-Morley interferometer, MMI, had scientists scrambling for an explanation. This was perhaps the first major failure of the theory, the ether theory. Since it had been accepted earlier in that century, scientists of the day had known that our actual velocity in the universe was 370 kilometers per second. They would have been even more astonished by the null result of the Michelson-Morley interferometer. There were several theories that were proposed to explain the null result, including special relativity. Michelson, who himself was a Nobel Prize winner, rejected the special relativity and championed the ether drag theory. The ether drag theory, which was actually proposed as early as 1831, is that there is a balloon or sphere of ether that surrounds the Earth and is carried or dragged with the Earth in its motion in the universe. This is actually a very logical theory. The Earth's gravity can attract and hold very heavy air molecules, heavy compared to ethons, called our atmosphere as it travels toward Leo. Thus, it is logical to suggest that our gravity can also hold ethons, which are much lighter than air molecules, just as our Earth's gravity protects the air molecules from being attracted by the superior gravity of the Sun. Our Earth's gravity would protect the ethons from the superior gravity of our Sun. Both Cucci and Stokes believed in ether drag decades before the Michelson-Morley interferometer. Both Cucci and Stokes believed in ether drag decades before the Michelson-Morley interferometer. Cucci and Stokes, the ether inside of this balloon is at rest and does not rotate with the Earth, according to Michelson's version of ether drag. In other words, the ether in the ether drag is stationary or nearly stationary, and the Earth rotates underneath the ether. To understand ether drag, consider this metaphor. Imagine a large beach ball sitting on a table. Suspended at the center of this large beach ball is a golf ball that is rotating on an axis. Since the air in the beach ball does not rotate with the golf ball, a very small object such as a dust particle on the surface of the rotating golf ball would experience a small wind. This wind would not be caused by the beach ball moving. It is still on the table. It would be caused by the surface of the golf ball being pushed through the stationary air inside the beach ball by the rotation of the golf ball. It is a very small wind, to be sure, depending on how fast the golf ball is rotating. But even if the beach ball were moving, that is, suppose it were attached to the top of the car traveling at 100 kilometers per hour, the wind on the surface of the golf ball would be the same, which I can't explain this. If the rotating golf ball represents the rotating Earth, and if the stationary air inside of the beach ball represents ether, we have the model of ether drag championed by Albert Michelson. The golf ball rotates, but the air inside the beach ball does not rotate with the golf ball. Similarly, the Earth rotates, but the ether in the Similarly, the Earth rotates, but the ether and the ether drag, note the ether and the ether drag will simply be referred to the ether drag, does not rotate with the Earth. In this model, note that no part of the golf ball is stationary inside the beach ball except for the axis of the golf ball. The air above the golf ball and the axis of the golf ball are the items inside the beach ball that are at rest. The golf ball itself, except for its axis, is in motion relative to the sides of the beach ball and relative to the air. Thus, any point on the extended axis of the rotating golf ball should be considered at rest. Without ether drag, the ether wind would be 370 kilometers per second on the surface of the Earth. With ether drag, the Earth would be totally shielded from this 370 kilometers per second ether wind, or even the 30 kilometers per second ether wind if the Sun's ether drag extended beyond our orbit's distance from the Sun. And the only wind would be caused by the rotation of the Earth at a maximum of 0.45 kilometers per second on the equator. At the North Pole, the South Pole, or anywhere on the extended axis of the Earth, the ether wind would be zero. The Michelson-Morley interferometer experiment was not accurate enough to detect the ether wind with ether drag. The Michelson-Morley interferometer equipment was not accurate enough to detect the ether wind with ether drag. That is approximately 0.45 kilometers per second. So, in 1925, Michelson, Gale, and Pearson, now assuming ether drag, designed a different experiment to detect the much smaller ether wind. This experiment was successful to within 2.5% of detecting the rotation velocity of the Earth at their latitude. However, by this time, relativity had been established, and their experiment was simply brushed off by the scientific community. The Feely and Keating experiments. The Feely-Keating experiments in 1971 are among the most famous experiments in the history of physics. The experiments were designed to test the validity of Einstein's special relativity and his general theory of relativity, quote GR. Feely and Keating twice flew 4 cesium atomic clocks around the world in commercial jets, first eastbound then westbound. Their experiments proved that time, as measured by atomic clocks, is a function of the direction, velocity, and altitude of jet airplanes. The direction and velocity of the airplanes were factors of the special relativity, and the altitude of jets were factors of the general relativity. I should note that time, in this case, is the actual time as measured by the atomic clocks. compared to the time kept by the stationary atomic clocks at the US Naval Observatory, USNO, which stay on the ground. The eastbound clocks measured time slower than stationary clocks, and westbound clocks measured time faster than the stationary clock. Prior to the experiment, Feely correctly predicted that the westbound clocks would measure time faster than stationary clocks. So the Feely-Keating experiment is considered a proof that the special relativity and general relativity are valid theories. But the Feely-Keating used a very different version of special relativity than was proposed by Einstein in 1905. For example, in the old special relativity of 1905, every element of the experiment was considered or could be considered an at-rest relative reference frame, RRF, relative reference frame. This was the entire intent of the concept of relative reference frames. For example, if there were 10 jet airplanes flying, at 10 different velocities in 10 different directions, only one of these 10 airplanes could be used as the at-rest reference frame for the formulas of relativity to determine the relative time between it and any two other planes. By 1971, however, the concept of relative reference frames had been totally eliminated. In the new special relativity used by Feely and Keating, none of the sets of jet airplanes or atomic clocks in the experiment were allowed to be considered at rest. Not even the stationary atomic clocks at the United States National Observatory. US Naval Observatory. Okay, fine. Not even the stationary atomic clocks at the US Naval Observatory could be considered at rest. In the new special relativity used by the Feely and Keating, only one at-rest reference frame was allowed, and that was a non-rotating observer looking down at the North Pole from a great distance, or to put it more simply, a non-rotating point high above the North Pole. This at-rest reference point was not part of the experiment, meaning there was no atomic clock at that point. The at-rest point of the HK of the Feely-Keating was many thousands of kilometers from any of the atomic clocks that were part of the experiment. The entire concept of relative reference frames was that any object that was part of the experiment could be considered at rest. No object in the experiment was ever considered at rest by Feely and Keating. It is important to emphasize that the observer or point is non-rotating. If the observer rotated with the Earth, then a stationary point on the equator, for example, would be viewed as being at rest relative to the observer's viewpoint. However, because the observer is not rotating, then a stationary point on the equator would be moving at a velocity equal to the angular rotation velocity of the Earth at the latitude, that is 0 degrees north. Thus, the stationary clock at the US Naval Observatory was considered to be in motion due to the rotation of the Earth. That is, its velocity was measured relative to the rotation velocity of the Earth at its latitude, because the observer was not rotating. Thus, the stationary clock was actually in motion. Let's call a spade a spade. The Feely and Keating could be said to have used a local or localized absolute reference frame, local ARF, and a local or localized absolute time. By absolute, I mean that the at-rest reference frame that they chose was not part of the experiment and did not move relative to other objects. Running low on power. Let's got some power. By absolute, I mean that the at-rest reference frame they chose was not part of the experiment and did not move relative to the other objects and did not rotate during the experiment. By local, I mean that they did not use the universal reference frame of cosmic microwave background radiation, which had not been discovered by 1971, or the reference frame of the sun's Barry Center, which Feely and Keating obviously would have known about, or the galactic Barry Center, which they should have known about. But instead, they use a reference frame within the ionosphere, which is local to the Earth, meaning it travels with the Earth in its motion in the universe. The choice of an at-rest reference frame thousands of kilometers from the experiment was clearly not the intent of the original special relativity, but was added by Einstein before or during 1920 when he started talking about the center of a rotating disk as the one and only allowable at-rest reference point. Einstein's change of mind from using at-rest reference frames that were part of the experiment to using a single local absolute reference frame that was thousands of kilometers from the object in the experiment was undoubtedly due to empirical data. Einstein was known to have been working on the Doppler effect of Canal rays, a predecessor to today's atomic clocks, prior to 1908. In fact, the 1919 Nobel Prize awarded to Johannes Stark for the discovery of the Doppler effect in Canal rays, which discovery was made by Stark in 1905. Feely and Keating did not invent the concept of using an at-rest reference frame on the extended axis of the Earth. They knew what they had to do before they did the experiment. The two articles written by Feely before the experiment proved that. They knew that if they used the stationary United States National Observatory, US Naval Observatory, US Naval Observatory atomic clock as their at-rest reference point, formulas of special relativity would not have worked without the actual data. Even before the Feely-Keating, it was known that in order to get the formulas of the special relativity to work, it was necessary to pick a localized absolute reference frame on the extended axis of the Earth. It is artificial reference frame, absolute reference frame. I think absolute reference frame, or artificial. Okay. Figure it out later, on the extended axis of the Earth. It was probable that the reason Feely and Keating used a non-rotating point high above the North Pole instead of the center of the Earth is because its use made it easier to visualize and explain why the stationary US Naval Observatory atomic clock had to be in motion. The goal of the special relativity, the main goal of the original special relativity, was to replace the concept of universal reference frame or absolute reference frame with the concept of relative reference frame. In other words, its main goal was to replace the then dominant theory of ether, which represented a universal reference frame, with the particle theory of light. But the concept of relative reference frame was dropped in the transition from the old special relativity to the new special relativity, as is demonstrated by the fact that the Feely-Keating used only one local absolute reference frame, not the relative reference frames of the objects that were a part of the experiment. Furthermore, the universal reference frame has been proven to exist by two vastly different experiments, both the cosmic microwave background radiation experiments, which are ongoing, and the experiments of Ronald D. White in 1991 have detected the universal reference frame. The old or original special relativity dealt with relative time differences of the objects in the experiment, which basically meant imaginary times. To understand why I use the term imaginary times, suppose in the above 10 jet example you chose one of the 10 jet airplanes as a target. Suppose you then simultaneously and independently picked each of the other 9 airplanes as the at-rest reference frame and calculated the relative time of the target jet airplanes relative to each of the 9 at-rest reference frames. The target jet airplane would have 9 different relative times simultaneously. This means that relative time is really imaginary time, relative only to the chosen observer, that is, at-rest reference frame. The actual time of the target jet airplane would be different than any of the imaginary times. Any of the imaginary times of the other 9 observers per the HK, per the Webster Kehr. That is, unless one of the jets just happens to be at rest relative to the axis of the Earth. The concept of relative time evolved from being the imaginary time of the old special relativity to the actual time of the new special relativity. In other words, the same term relative time can be used for imaginary time or actual time. This obviously causes a lot of confusion. When the term relative time is used, the context must be studied. When the term relative time is used, the context must be studied. Even Hafele and Keating were confused by this. They claimed that their experiment solved the clock paradox. As far as the old special relativity is concerned, their experiment was totally irrelevant to the clock paradox. The clock paradox was a paradox of the imaginary time of the old special relativity. The clock paradox was resolved not by solving the problems with the old special relativity, but by dropping the old special relativity in favor of the new special relativity, which used actual time or imaginary time. By using the same term, relative time, for both imaginary time and actual time, the authors incorrectly thought they had solved stuff. And so by using the same term, relative time, for both imaginary time and actual time, the authors incorrectly thought they had solved the problems of the old special relativity. The new special relativity dealt with actual time differences, meaning the measurements of the atomic clocks were of actual time changes of the clocks, not apparent or imaginary time changes. The actual time measured by atomic clock changes as the jet airplanes carrying the clocks speeds up, slows down, changes direction, etc. This is profound because the Webster Kehr talks about actual time differences. It must then deal with actual causes by those actual changes. To be more specific, nothing needs to be mentioned to cause imaginary time changes, but they are, because they are imaginary. Thus, the cause is imaginary. However, something actual, that is a substance, force, or field, must cause actual time changes. Neither the old special relativity nor the new special relativity officially offer any such casual explanation. In other words, the concept of relative time changed from imaginary time to actual time, but the special relativity failed to make the change from an imaginary cause to an actual cause. This is why the scientific community thinks that an imaginary cause can generate actual time changes in atomic clocks. In reality, the 10 jet airplanes in the above metaphor do experience 10 different actual time changes. In reality, the 10 jet airplanes in the above metaphor do experience 10 different actual time changes. The Webster Kehr proves that. The Webster Kehr proves that. The flaw in the old special relativity is in allowing any of the flaw in the old special relativity is in allowing any of the 10 jet airplanes to be considered at rest. This leads to paradoxical and conflicting imaginary time differences and even incorrect predictions of actual time, because the Webster Kehr used the correct at-rest reference frame, which was thousands of kilometers from any of the jets or US Naval Observatory. For the atomic clocks, they did fix that part of the special relativity. And as will be seen later in this book, the actual time differences between any two of the airplanes can be calculated, but it is a two-step process, not a one-step process as the old special relativity implies.